Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we study the loving romantic tale of how Kumail Nanjiani met his future wife's parents.
In The Big Sick. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And this episode, we are indeed doing The Big Sick, the 2017 dramedy, I guess is the best description for it. Semi-autobiographically based on Kumail Nanjiani and how he met his wife, Emily V. Gordon, based on a script that the two of them wrote together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is going to be an interesting one because once again, it is drawing specifically from real life.
Yes.
But also being created by the people. It is based on real life.
And unlike some of the other things, the based on real life ones we've talked in the past, there was no media blitz like that.
Yeah, there was no news reporter following around this entire time. Yeah, he wasn't famous yet.
So yeah, this is entirely based on the memories of the two main writers. And even they have gone on the record to say that they disagreed on their own history.
Yeah, well, I mean, two different perspectives, obviously.
Yeah.
One in which Emily V. Gordon was asleep for most of it, so
Yes.
or in a coma. Yeah, it's true. But obviously, they've talked a lot about it since then, and so on and so forth. I think it's going to be very interesting to talk about. So, what do you think of The Big Sick?
I absolutely love this movie. I do think it's a real classic. I mean, I am at heart a lover of rom-coms.
Aw, that's nice.
And that is very clear that Kumail Nanjiani is also a fan of rom-coms. Just by listening to him in interviews and watching this film and looking at all his little mini homages. And the fact that even in the movie he addresses the fact that he had Hugh Grant hair. Because he liked Hugh Grant so much.
Yep, which is kind of a great dig.
Yes.
Yep.
So yeah, it touched on a lot of what I loved. The whole idea of culture clash is all very good. Like, I've seen some of that just in my own family, probably not to the same extent as being a first-generation Australian to two migrant parents who came from different countries. I sort of can get the feeling I get how that's made.
I really love this movie as well. It's I saw it in cinemas when it originally came out on your recommendation, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, which is quite cool. I think it is really fantastic as a rom-com. I definitely don't have the same affinity with the genre that you do. I feel like there's a lot of really terrible ones out there. And I enjoy ones that are particularly well made, but I just feel like there is so much rubbish in this specific genre. But this one especially feels so rightly in line with all the tropes, but also so fresh at the same time. Even your gag you made at the beginning about how he met his parents, how he met Emily's parents, is kind of true, because this is a rom-com where one of the romantic leads is in a coma for most of the movie. And I think that's a really interesting, cool perspective. It is more about the contrasting relationship with their parents, as well as the culture clash aspect, I think is very interesting too. Very clearly this is drawing on a very personal story and something that was quite difficult for the both of them. But I think it makes for a really, really interesting twist and fresh outlook on a genre that I think can be very tropey and tired sometimes. And I think it is fantastic. Not to mention it's also really funny as well, because it stars Kumail Nanjiani, who's a great comedian. So yeah.
And he could just bring on his comedian friends to fill in the roles for the other comedians.
Yeah, exactly. Just Bo Burnham's just casually in a role who's in 4 scenes or something like that. It's really weird. Yeah.
Adie Bryant doing some great work.
Yeah.
Literally from her own stand-up routine.
Oh, I wondered that.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. But no, yeah, I think this movie is really, really great. And this is the type of movie that I feel like I could recommend to almost anybody, because it's just, not only is it really, it's lightly dramatic, but it's also quite funny, and it's also really endearing. It's just, I think it's really, really great.
it's grounded in a way that isn't usually touched on, in the fact that when most people think grounded, they think, oh, it's very realistic and very dry, deep, kind of depressing. This is grounded in the sense that people are making those like awkward jokes. They're trying to make levity out of the situation.
Yeah.
And they're just letting their emotions run wild, even if that seems semi-unrealistic. It's just enough that you feel, yep, I know exactly where they're coming from. Like that entire scene in the drive-through of the burger place.
Oh, yeah, that's
where
right.
he gets angry,
Just
yells
started
at the
working
man.
at him, man. Yeah.
And like throws the bin over it and then immediately goes, oh, I'm sorry, and just starts picking it all up again. I'm like, yes, I feel that on so many levels.
Yeah. There was even that as well with like Ray Romano was talking to him. He's like, I've always wanted to talk to someone about 9/11 with someone with people. And it's like, you've never talked to people about 9/11 before? But it's like, what's your take? It's like, oh, it's a tragedy. It was 19 of our best guys. I remember in the cinema, the laughter that erupted from that line was just great because it was so unexpected. But it's like so weirdly awkward, but also really entertaining at the same time. Because I normally hate awkward scenes in movies, but all of this really works. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of just us talking. About this. Yep.
That's what's so good about this movie, is the fact that it is, because it is semi-autobiographical, and they've just taken the best aspects of a lot of their real life, their actual courtship, and just went, let's see what happens.
Yeah, sure.
With that, it works.
Oh yeah, I think it's great. Like, I mean, they definitely over dramatized like some aspects and add things other and things like that. Like, this is, which they've admitted, it is semi-autobiographical. Like, it is a not, I don't want to say a loose basis because the broad strokes are still there, but like it takes its liberties in a lot of different areas. But I think that really works. Like, I don't think it necessarily needed to be a more faithful adaptation. So
everything they did was to drive forward more of the themes that are rooted in.
Yeah. Well, they turned it into a more straightforward, like, cinematic narrative, basically. And I think almost all of their changes work to varying extents. So, it's really fantastic. This movie's great. Oh, we can start talking about, like, kind of the people themselves, I guess.
Yes. Well, you have your main two leads in Kumail Nanjiani, played by Kumail Nanjiani.
Big surprise.
Yep. And Zoe Kazan.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Zoe Kazan.
Yeah.
Playing Emily Gardner, who is based on Emily V. Gordon.
Which is Kumail Nanjiani's
Nanjiani's wife.
Yeah, actual wife. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, I think they do a really good job. I do think Zoe did some really fantastic work, especially in the last...
Especially while she's asleep. Apparently, I did hear that she kept actually falling asleep in those scenes and then waking up and ruining takes, which is quite funny. But no, you're right. She does some great stuff at the end of the film as well, There's a really...
Spoiler alert, she wakes up.
Oh!
Which you would think, given that it is based on real life and written by the person who is in the coma.
Yeah, it's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really funny. But she has this really fantastic line in the third act when she says, like, I know you went through all this crazy transformative stuff and meeting my parents and things like that, but I was asleep through all of that. Which I think is a very interesting arc, and from what I understand was like very parallel to the actual experience. Like, I remember, so I have this movie on Blu-ray, I watched all the special features for it, and in one of the interviews, like, Emily's talking about the fact that I had to kind of reconcile with Kumail's version of the story because I didn't go through any of that stuff. Like, all of that happened while I was unconscious. Which I think is super interesting. Yeah.
It's basically a rom-com where only one half of the pairing actually goes through a meaningful transformation.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Emily doesn't necessarily drastically change, and in some respects, obviously, there's a little bit of an arc in the third act. But outside of that, absolutely. So, I
mean, that also weirdly kind of mirrors the real life, because about a month after coming out of the coma, Emily wrote about how she came out of a coma and nothing changed. Which she then later went on to rectify and just went, actually, no, I was young and naive. That changed a lot for me. I just didn't notice it straight away. and that I think plays really well. Like everything that happens in that third act to Emily, the character, is very much like I haven't changed, but also things are starting to change.
Yeah, and things have changed around me.
Yes.
Yeah, which is obviously the thing that she has to reconcile with. Like, there's that really fantastic scene when, like, Kumail shows up after she's woken up, and the parents are ecstatic to see him, but she's like, what on earth are you doing here? Yeah, exactly. So
Last time I saw you, we were in the middle of a breakup.
yeah, we were breaking up. So, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but that the breakup before she goes into the coma was added for the film.
Yes.
Like, they were still very much together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were just,
sure.
as they said, it's more dramatic to have the coma happen during a breakup rather than just being casual, which is what actually happened.
Yeah, exactly. Which, I mean, once again, I think talks to one of the things that they changed to help the narrative. And I think that inevitably quite works because it leads to a great scene like that. So, yeah. No, awesome. Great. Is there anything specifically you want to talk? Like, obviously, we can start discussing some of the actual other changes that they made regarding the true story based on what they've talked about, at least.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, this is a loose inspiration in some respects, in that most notably, almost everything has been kind of enhanced dramatically in some ways. We've already talked about the fact that there was the breakup, the subplot regarding Ray Romano having an affair, as well as completely new. Apparently, that was very awkward for Emily in real life to tell her parents that, which understandable, I guess.
But I think apparently a lot of her parents were the characterization of the parents was quite new. They were probably the most changed of all the characters.
Yeah.
From their real life counterparts.
Yeah, sure. I did wonder that at the very least.
yes.
Yeah. There is, regarding the culture clash thing as well, they definitely heightened because while there was still... Kumail and Emily talk about a story when she was coughing horribly in the corner, and Kumail was on the phone to his parents, and he's like, just quieten down. They can't know that you're here or something like that. And he's like, well, in my defense, I didn't know that coughing was going to lead to a coma. But Emily kind of talks about the fact that she didn't necessarily understand why Kumail couldn't tell his family about her. And what happened in real life, I believe, is that initially when Kumail admits that he'd been dating Emily, and that she was a white woman and so on and so forth, in real life, apparently the parents were very concerned when they found out that she was sick. And then only after she woke up did they get really annoyed the fact that it wasn't, that it wasn't someone that they set up for him, basically.
Yeah. And also more the fact that he was lying about going along with these setups rather than saying, oh no, I had met this white girl.
Yep, exactly. So, and he was, like, not necessarily disowned from the family and anything like that either. Like, they eventually came around, I believe, which is kind of hinted at in the final photos during the credits, when they have, like, a Hindi wedding, which I thought was quite cool. So
with his parents being there.
Yeah.
And that occurred 3 months after the coma, so...
I know, which is kind of incredible. Yeah. So, in many respects, it really feels like a heightening of dramatic tension and stakes in a way, but I think all of it, like, kind of works, like...
It's all to the betterment of the major themes that they're going for, rather than like trying to be completely accurate.
And obviously, it does make it feel more melodramatic and like more detached from real life. But I don't know if that necessarily hinders the movie in any specific way, because it still feels kind of... I don't think sincere is the correct word, but there is like a realism or an authenticity to the movie. Most notably, I kind of felt as we kind of talked about before, but in the dialogue and the relationship between characters, and that it all feels kind of real and not so pre-scripted in some ways. Like, particularly the relationship Kumail has with Zoe playing Emily, I think is really great. Not only because they're not like incredibly witty people throwing barbs at each other and things like that, but there's like weird awkward pauses and silences and things like that, even if they still kind of get on. He has a very similar relationship with the parents as well.
Yes.
Parents are both fantastic too.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't talked about it, but Ray Romano and Holly Hunter are both incredible. Yep. Holly Hunter is so good. I feel like Holly Hunter should be considered a national treasure, but just isn't.
Yeah.
And
I was about to say, in regards to when you were talking about the fact that it felt authentic, was another great scene that I love was between Kumail and Ray Romano's character when they're both at Kumail's place just trying to sleep. And
when he admits the affair.
Yeah,
right.
And Ray Romano is like admitting all this stuff, and Kumail's just kind of like, cool, we can talk about this in the morning. Just good 8 hours before
Yep.
eventually just like realizing what's happening and comes around to it.
Yep.
Which I feel is rather than just going straight into the intense dialogue between two felt more real, or the very jokey playing off that like found the right balance between those.
Yeah, it's underwritten in the best way possible. I think like it would be, and this is what happens at a lot of I feel comedies, but also melodramas, and that things are perpetually overwritten. Like characters don't necessarily have conversations the way that normal people do. They're always like either heightened with emotions, or like it's the Sorkin thing of everyone being a wit genius. And that is a very often something that can happen in comedy, I feel, where you just have all these like kind of barbs constantly being throwing back and forth in something that is obviously funny to observe, but not necessarily authentic to real life conversation. And I think this is one of the parts, we haven't necessarily talked about it at this point, but Judd Apatow is an executive producer on this. He was one of the main reasons that this film got made. And he has like kind of a very, I don't want to say effortless, but improvisational like comedy style in some of his earlier films, like 40-Year-Old Virgin and things like that. And it feels like that energy is kind of present in this, and I think it really kind of helps the story too. So
He's very good at getting the true character from the main force behind it.
Yeah.
He's very much an instigator. He's not like he won't go through changes after changes to fit anyone else's sort of movie except the original person. Just went, yeah, this is, I know where you're trying to come from, and this is your sort of comedy style. I will help fulfill that.
Yeah, sure. Do you know if much or any of the movie was improvised? I didn't see necessarily any references to it, but I kind of wondered while watching it again that like a couple of these scenes felt like that it was a little bit ad-libbed. So
Yeah, it feels like this. I couldn't get any real, in my research, get a real idea of how much was in private. I do know a lot of the, like, comedy sets and stuff were pretty improvised.
yeah, sure.
Especially for all the other characters rather than Kumail.
Yep.
And I know, like, that scene where he has his breakdown, I think they scripted that, but they didn't tell everyone. So a lot of, like, the reactions from the extras
That's right.
are
Yeah,
all,
yeah.
like...
Quite genuine, actually.
genuine
Yeah, yeah.
and stuff.
I think a lot of the laughter in that scene is genuine as well. Like,
Yeah.
the extras were often not told what exactly the people would be doing or saying.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I know with like Bo Burnham's scene, he basically came up with a completely new set for the one take that they did that wasn't rehearsal. So the audience's laugh was genuine.
Yeah, yeah. That's really quite cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think there was a lot of that kind of like not necessarily improvised, but everything was sort of kept pretty free flow. And again, that adds to the sort of authenticity kind of thing of it,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
no one is entirely sure what's going to happen right next.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is kind of the line we've been skirting around all this is this movie is obviously a heightened version of reality, obviously being semi-autobiographical, but it still very feels intimately tied to reality in some ways.
Yes.
Also still just being like, and I think that's kind of where the funniness and charm comes from, because it is seeing like a bunch of people that just feel naturally kind of charismatic or funny or like endearing situations amongst all of this kind of tragedy at the same time. So yeah, I think it works really well, and like I think it's really impressive as well. Obviously, I'm sure there were other inputs and things like that, but coming from essentially like first screenwriters like Kumail and Emily V. Gordon, which like I think they'd done a couple of smaller things before that, and they've done things
they did
since
like a
then.
podcast, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But like in many respects, this was almost like a screenwriting debut for the both of them, and obviously drawing on something that is very personal and a very significant part of their relationship. I think they do a genuinely incredible job. Like I really feel like the strengths of the movie, even though the cast is fantastic, even though like a lot of the dramatic moments are really, really great, like the script is the bedrock that really makes it actually something genuinely special, I think. So, yeah. Oh, pardon me. Is there any other specific changes you want to talk about from real life that you noted, or?
No, well, we've talked about both sides of the parents. We've talked about the main characters themselves. A lot of the comedians are all very seemingly pretty accurate and inspired by a lot of the actual friends Kumail made along the way.
Not surprised.
Yeah. I remember hearing a great interview he had with Pete Holmes, who was his friend in New York, I think it was. So he was sort of very loosely inspired, I think, in some aspects, even though that part didn't come up. But you could see it was like he's basing these on his genuine friends from around
Sure. Obviously, like
Thanks.
this being semi-autobiographical, he drew a lot from the other things that were going around at the time. So yeah. And like early comedy stuff and so on and so forth, and then moving to New York and all that jazz. So yeah, no, interesting. It's see, this is the thing. Like, yeah, I know Judd Apatow talks about it in an interview, but like at the end of the day, this is also a movie that is also very much intimately about stand-up comedy in some respects, and also like the combination of personal stakes and relationships and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things going on there at the very least, but I think it is, genuinely quite good. I can't think of any other major changes that I noted from real life off the top of my head. As you noted, like, Emily's parents are almost entirely original. Yeah. Like they were not connected to the real life parents, and maybe even the same way that Kumail's parents were. But outside of that, like, I mean, you know, obviously Emily legitimately got horribly sick. Yep. Went through all of that stuff, so on and so forth.
Same illness as portrayed in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like even when Kumail shows the board of like all the visitor stickers, he got at the end, I'm pretty sure that was real. Like he had the same thing in real life as well. So
that's why his surname didn't change, despite the fact that it was meant to.
yeah, exactly. So it's I don't know. I feel like obviously that this is a heightened version of reality in many respects, but I think all the changes, as we noted, work quite well. Is there anything else we want to talk about regarding the movie? This might be quite a shorter episode in comparison. Yeah.
It's basically just going, yes, we love this movie.
It's very good. You should definitely watch it. Yeah. I mean, we can kind of talk about specifically, as you noted before, how this connects to so many of the tropes of the rom-com.
Yes.
I mean, because like obviously the broad strokes of like the meet cute is here and like, you know, general hookup and then the breakup and all that. Like, especially the first act kind of feels like it intentionally evokes a lot of those similar beats. Obviously to be immediately subverted by the fact, Emily's in a coma for the rest of the film.
Interestingly enough, that is pretty accurate to their meeting. Anyway, the actual meet
outside
cute
of the breakup anyway. The breakup did not happen. Yeah.
Oh no, but like the actual meet cute moments is apparently, aside from the fact that Emily Gordon has gone on to the record and saying like basically that happened, except in the movie version I'm more aware that he's trying to pick me up.
Oh right.
Whereas for that whole thing of writing her name in Urdu, basically she just fell for that straight away.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So yeah, it's interesting. It felt very tropey in the way it was sort of written. Like it clearly is harkening back to something like Four Weddings and a Funeral, but that was real life as well. So
yeah, it's interesting. Life imitates art, imitates life. Yeah, art is a lie, nothing is real. No, of course. I think and this kind of talks back to it as well in many respects, but there is almost an argument to be made that the meaningful relationship that Kumail makes in this movie is not with Emily, it's with his parents, is with Emily's parents. Yeah. Which I think is super cool and completely distinct for a rom-com as well. Like, I mean, obviously the meet the parents thing is very often a trope in a lot of films. Like, you have to deal with, like, the overbearing father and the sneaky, backstabbing mother or something like that. But this is kind of a very intentional and real and authentic to life subversion of that, in that it is kind of... What I find so interesting is that what he learns through Emily's parents is kind of reflected on Emily unintentionally. Not only through like the greater perception of the mother, but also like looking at the photos in the book and things like that. There's a really fantastic little detail that Holly Hunter brought into it, but the necklace, Emily and her wear the same necklace, which I think is really quite cool and a really great way to kind of represent the bond between the two of them as well, considering they don't really share a scene together until Emily wakes up, like over 2/3 of the way through the film. So it's good. Yeah, it's very good. Cool. I guess we don't have much more else to talk about regarding this movie. So I would just, as someone who does not typically care for a lot of rom-coms, I think this is really fantastic. It feels really fresh. It's also quite funny. Like, as I said, I would recommend this to almost anybody. Yeah.
And as someone who really likes rom-coms, I also think it's fantastic and refreshing, and really recommend it to anyone.
There you go. So just watch The Big Sick. That's the thing at the end of the day.
And watch it again.
Yes, as I do.
Because that's another sort of thing. You sort of pick up some of the other things you don't really notice. Like, for me, on the second viewing, I picked up everything to do with the idea of Emily being a goth girl, that sort of little mini through line that sort of happens, which adds even more sort of little tiny details and layers to that whole idea of not knowing where someone's coming from.
Yeah, not having a full complete picture
Yeah.
of Emily in some respects. Like, as I kind of noted, what's his name? Kumail gets closer to Emily while she's asleep through her parents in that way, which I think is super cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, because there's one of the other little lines that broke up was the fact that it's like, when they were breaking up, Kumail says, "I'm fighting against 1400-year-old culture and tradition. You were ugly in high school." But then as he sort of comes back to that with the mother and sees that actually this was a lot of more to do with her as how she grew up and the graveyard photos and stuff.
Yeah. Very special photos.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very good.
So yeah, watch it again if you have already watched it, because you do pick up on the little things as well that really make this shine.
Yeah, and I think that the simple fact that this is such a personal story for the screenwriters, I think, at the end of the day, really helps that, because they want to. This is not like a job for hire in the same way that so many other screenwriters' tasks would be. Like, this is literally something they're drawing from real life, and something that they clearly want to have respect for. Which I ultimately think they do, and I think, as I keep saying, it makes for a better movie. So, yeah, fantastic, great. All right, shall we move on to the more difficult part of the episode then?
Yeah.
Do it differently.
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Oh, God, help us.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Oh God. Sure. I'll throw things off the top of my head.
Yep.
Because, like we mentioned, this is really bloody hard to.
It's really hard with good stuff.
Yes.
Unless you want to do it completely differently.
Yeah, and again, the issue is we're talking about a story that we are not part of.
Yeah.
This is a story that we've had no reference. The only references are from the writers themselves. And so you can't go like, "Oh, I changed this to be more realistic." It's like, well, no. If the people who lived through it see this is more important than that, who am I going to judge?
Yeah, exactly. This is not our place.
No.
And like we perpetually pretend to be experts about stuff when we're not, but legitimately now, like what else are we going to do? So
I don't have a bachelor's in Nanjiani.
maybe in 10 years I might offer that. Not in Australia, not the way things are going, but yes.
Yes. So yeah, do it differently is quite. If anything, it's going to be like, yeah, I kind of want to see a sequel where it's like Kumail living in New York with his friends, Burnham and Eddie Bryant.
Yep.
And see, like, take 2 of the rom-com.
Yeah, and see where it goes from there.
Yeah.
Granted, I don't know if it's going to be quite so sad, considering they get married within
Yes.
3 months and have been happily married since.
It's not a good dramatic story, but it might be nice, just a bit of wholesome.
I mean, it'd be a fun hangout movie. Which
Yeah.
is, once again, another very Judd Apatow thing. So, yeah.
Just like, oh, this couple is falling more in love and being nerdy and geeky about things.
No, great.
Which is me to a T, so yeah, I'd watch more of that.
I'll watch more of myself on screen. Why not? Yeah. I mean, literally, once again, for me, like, I have to do this completely differently because, I mean, look, maybe I might be able to nitpick and say, oh, like, I didn't really like this moment and so else, but there's not really a whole lot there. What I would kind of want to do is to do the movies from Emily's perspective instead of Kumail's. So it's... That'd be a legitimate way to do this. Interestingly, yes. I'm sure it wouldn't literally just be, oh, I meet this guy, I'm in a coma, half an hour of like blackness, then I wake up and the guy is super into me. Like I think it would be a really interesting it would be super fascinating to see her try and fill in the gaps of what happened in all those times while she's in a coma, like post it. So, like, it very much, the structure of the movie would fundamentally change. Like, the first part of it would be generally the same, that we wouldn't have the introspection with Kumail's side. And then, like, there'd be the coma, it would cut forward, and then the next 2 acts would kind of be, or the second act would be her realizing everything that Kumail did in the meantime while she was asleep and kind of looking back at that retrospectively. And then the third act would be similar to what we see in the film, and they reconcile. So, I mean, like, I don't know how much it would change. I don't know if it would be about a story because I feel like the culture clash emphasis wouldn't be quite as prominent. And obviously a lot of the best dramatic stuff happens when she is asleep. But even so, like, I don't know. I'd just be interested to see that, I guess.
You can go in a real divergent way with that. turn it straight away
Into
no
a-
longer a rom-com,
into a horror?
Yeah,
Yep,
horror
yep.
thriller. Now she has this guy who knows so much about her
Yep.
that they just had a fight from her perspective, and is now trying to shower her with his love. And if that is not reciprocated,
That is super creepy, isn't it? Yeah, from a different perspective. Wow.
like with
okay.
enough tweaks, it stops being, oh, they get married in 3 years, to, oh, he's in jail in 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. Damn, now I want to see that movie. There you go. That's to do it differently.
Yep.
Set it from Emily's perspective and then change the end to make it a horror film.
I mean, you probably have to change it a lot more, because I don't think if this was to be a thriller, her parents wouldn't be super keen on this guy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could make a whole thing where, like, he presented an image and almost, like, kind of gaslit her parents and things like that. Like, imagine how freaky it would be if this guy is super creepy, but her parents are supporting him over her. Like, that's kind of super unsettling because of all this stuff that happened while you're asleep. Yeah, I don't know. There we go. We unintentionally made something that might be legitimately interesting. Awesome. All right. Well, now that that's thankfully out of the way, we can get into random talk.
Yeah.
Have you got anything to recommend us this episode?
Yes, I would like to recommend the work of one of the side comedians that we talked about in Burnham. Go watch his special, Make Happy.
Oh, I have heard of that actually. Yeah.
This is Netflix special, so you can, if you've got a Netflix account, you can easily watch it.
And at this point, who doesn't have a Netflix account?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is just fantastic. It's a great little introspective piece. He talks about love as well, and goes through the tropes with that, but with a more cynical eye. It has a great little message at the end of it. It's wholesome but heartbreaking as well. It's a lot like the film.
Yeah, lovely.
Go watch it.
I have not seen very many stand-up comedy specials, but I really like a lot of them that almost turn it into more of a. It's less about making people laugh and more about like just being a storytelling medium. Basically, it's kind of a way of conveying a dramatic arc through comedy and through talking on stage.
In that case, you should also go watch Hannah Gatsby.
Is that Nanette?
Nanette's,
Yes.
and then subsequently Douglas.
Yeah, I've heard amazing things about Nanette, but I have not got around to seeing it at this point. So, yeah, cool, very great. I was going to recommend something just Kumail tangential. Like one of the first things I ever saw Kumail Nanjiani in was an episode of Community from the last season called Modern Espionage, which is, I know a lot of people aren't personally big fans of the later seasons of Community, but I think there's some really good stuff in there. And this episode, you can almost kind of watch on its own. You kind of need to see the previous Paintball episodes for it. But it's the last Paintball episode they did where Paintball has to go underground. And so the entire thing plays out like a spy movie, basically. Like, they've got all, like, the nicknames. And there's even, like, an opening credit sequence where it's, like, all the paintball guns, like, kind of being broken into their individual components in that really specific kind of blueprint design. And at the end of it, it is revealed that the paintball war was... created by Kumail Nanjiani, who is the head of the janitors at Community, so that they keep getting new payments basically to clean up all the paint, which is just delightful. And he's really funny. There's a really dumb standout at the end with a bunch of mannequins that I won't spoil. He's really great.
Even though you've already kind of spoiled with the reveal of Kumail.
Well, yeah, still. But anyway, it's a really, really good episode. He's in 2 Community episodes, but this is the one that I prominently remember him with. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that. And just Community in general, but that is personally one of my favorite episodes of the series. So yeah, fantastic.
A series we both highly recommend.
Yes, absolutely. Community has a very special place in my heart in many respects. It is the comfort food of TV shows for me. I feel like I can just put an episode of that every now and then and just switch my mind off and have a real good time. So it's great. All right, well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in all of your soppy love stories that we could inevitably turn into a super successful screenplay.
Donate all your ventilators to those in need.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we joked about this off mic, but the fact that we did 2 episodes back to back about someone fighting an oppressive regime who's targeting people who are born slightly differently, and now an episode here which mostly takes place in a hospital with a bunch of ventilators, being real topical.
Yeah.
Good job, us. 2020 is a hellhole. Well, next episode, we're going to be starting a new series of episodes on another really big franchise, actually, amusingly related to Star Wars, Pokemans. just because it's a big franchise, not because it's actually related to Star Wars. You know what I mean. So the first episode we're doing.
Despite the fact that this episode was about the Big Sick.
Yeah, I know, but I was just talking about Star Wars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. But yes, we are going to be starting with something that is potentially quite terrible, but we have not yet seen, and is related to Pokemon. I don't really know what I'm teasing here. Yeah.
Mewtwo Evolution.
Yep. So the remake of the first Pokemon movie,
Yes.
basically on Netflix, which I have not seen yet, but I've seen the trailer. Oh boy, this is going to be interesting. So stick around for that. That might be a really fun episode, or also might be really awful. Until next time, fare thee well.
Uh-oh.
Ugh, talk about topical.